Turch is the founder and director of the Center for Compassion-Focused Therapy in New York and president of the Compassionate Mind Foundation USA. Dr. Turch is the author of 6 books and numerous chapters and peer-reviewed articles, including the ACT Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Compassion and Buddhist Psychology and CBT, a Clinician's Guide.
What we're going to talk about today is how we can find courage and capacity to face anxiety in our embodied capacity for compassion. Compassion for others and self-compassion in particular. It's becoming a very interesting topic. It's becoming very popular in the field. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit of background. When I was 10, I was a very anxious child, like lots of kids in New Jersey, I would imagine, you know. And I had an uncle who was a veteran of the 82nd Airborne, Triple Nickel, 1st All-African American Paratrooper Division. And when he had come back from the war, he was stationed in the South, and he was not allowed to worship in the church where he was, expecting to worship, his religion of origin, if you will. And so he was, disappointed and sort of adrift, and he found Zen Buddhism as a way to worship and practice and cultivate his mind. And then many years later, when he met me and met this sort of like anxious 10-year-old, he kind of tricked me into learning about Zen by telling me he was going to teach me about the Force. Because this was like 1978, and he sort of said, those Jedi Knights, the thing they're doing? You just have to sit here and you breathe and you feel the Force in you, and then you feel the Force flowing out of you. And after a little while, I was old enough to get the joke and appreciate what he had given me. So then, after college, I kept studying about Buddhism, but I didn't know how to make that the focus of my life. And I wasn't really interested in the ism part, but in the way we can train the mind and compassion and concentration and freedom from the emotional knots that we get tied up in, So I went to graduate school for cognitive behavioral therapy for psychology, but in a CBT-oriented program. And then a beautiful kind of coincidence happened in that the field there's a lot of people like me, I think, who were like looking beyond traditional paradigms and into contemplative science traditions for new ways to develop evidence-based therapies. I wound up working at the Academy for Cognitive Therapy with Bob Leahy, originally a very dyed-in-the-wool kind of cognitive therapy situation. And we gradually developed new ways of working with budding kind of therapies like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and compassion-focused therapy. Compassion-focused therapy is a form of therapy developed by a very close friend of mine, Dr. Paul Gilbert in the UK. And we're going to take a very close look at how we can use CFT and apply it to OCD. And I was thinking about this. In a sense, in this talk, the data is not necessarily with me in a traditional sense, because this isn't the era of randomized controlled trials being funded really well, and we don't have 500 RCTs for a specific package, nor might we ever for CFT, but we are building a base of outcome research really rapidly. And in a sense, I want to suggest to you that when we look at the process research and the fundamental science of compassion, I think the data is very much with this movement, and I think it's something that is available to all of us, because we know from the day that we're born to the day that we die, our experience of warmth, loving kindness, compassion, and stability will affect every dimension of our being, from our neuroendocrine functioning to our heart rate, to our levels of anxiety, to how much we're able to socially engage. And when I was working at AICT, the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy, for about 7 years I worked as the head of what they called the Intensive OCD Treatment Program. And what that meant was trying everything for people with OCD, actually. It wasn't even as organized as it sounded. You know, a therapist would have a treatment-resistant OCD case, and we would confer, and we would have groups and DBT and ACT, and we would sort of tailor a treatment that would meet the person where they are. And I really value that experience, and even though kind of moved in a somewhat different direction over the last 7 or 8 years, it's really nice to feel sort of back at home to talk about some clinical experiences and personal experiences that involve compassion. It's also nice to have 2 microphones you can move back and forth from. I feel a little spoiled with that. Okay, so yeah, we're from the Center for Compassion-Focused Therapy in New York City. We're going to begin with a little experiential exercise. There's a teacher of mine, a meditation teacher for many years, who described how a beginning is invisible. And I'd like you to join me in understanding when we began our work here together today. So if you're comfortable, doing a little mindfulness-based work and putting aside your pen and paper and changing your seating posture a little bit, that's fine. And if not, see if you can just attend to this in a way that tunes into this, not in a heady way, but bringing your whole body into this experience together. So if you're willing, just allow your eyes to close and find a posture where your back is straight and supported. And we'll bring part of our attention to the soles of our feet on the ground. And then part of our attention to the top of our head. And then everything in between, breathing in and breathing attention into our whole physical presence here and now. Feeling our weight in the chair. And now we'll bring part of our attention to the sounds that are in the room. Even the space between the sounds. Just reaching out in all directions around us with our hearing. Noticing the sounds that are outside of the room. And the sounds that are farther away even than that. And now breathing in, knowing that we're breathing in. And breathing out and knowing that we're breathing out. Following the flow of the breath in and out of the body. So as we breathe in, it's as if we're breathing attention into our bodies. And as we breathe out, it's like letting go, just releasing. And let's sit mindfully with this question. When did this workshop, this talk, when did it begin for you? Is it just beginning now? Did it begin when your foot crossed the threshold to come into this room? Or when your head left the pillow this morning? And perhaps our work together began when you registered or saw the advertisement for this conference. And maybe if we could imagine a thread, like a silver thread, just goes back in space and time, from the you that's here now, just back through your whole life. Maybe this talk and this work we do today together, maybe it began farther back. Remembering the first time you felt moved to engage with the anxious suffering you experienced in the world. Maybe you were sitting, speaking with a family member or a friend. Maybe you were alone with your own emotions, your own thoughts. remembering this experience of sensitivity to the suffering we notice in the world, and being moved to do something about it. Noticing where that shows up in our bodies here and now. And as we exhale, just letting that image go. And I want us to bring to mind a time when we were sitting with someone, perhaps a client if we're a therapist, or a student, participant in a research trial, or maybe a loved one or a friend. Remember what it was like to meet the eyes of that person? Someone who in that moment felt stuck, so very much wanted you to help them to deal with the very difficult feelings or very difficult problems they were having. Remembering what it felt like in the body and in the mind and heart to meet the eyes of someone suffering and to feel compelled to take action, to be there with them, to be present. And as we exhale, just letting go of that image and gently just holding ourselves in kindness and returning to our breath. Following the breath as it enters the body and following the breath as it leaves the body. Taking in what we need from the world around us and letting go and releasing tension that we no longer need to carry. And then letting out a long exhalation, we bring our attention back to the soles of the feet and to the top of the head. And everything in between, the thoughts, the sensations, the images. We notice the space around us with our hearing. We just hear the space, hear the silence. And the sounds outside of the room, and then the sounds that are farther away even than that. Giving yourself some credit for trying something new and for being here together on a day where you could be doing so many other things, but you have come here to learn and to heal and to be together. And also we can acknowledge our intention to share whatever we learn together throughout this weekend with those people who we care about, those people who look to us for help and support. And remembering ourselves and taking some of that support inward to take care of who we are at our core. And then when you're ready, a long exhalation, we'll just let go of that whole exercise. We'll bring our attention back into the room together. Maybe, stretching out a little bit. I watch my dog at home. He's always throwing these little stretches into his day, releasing unnecessary tension. I like to learn from him in that way. We can all do a little bit of that. And then we'll move into learning about compassion together. We're going to begin with a definition. It's a very old definition. It's probably older than the historical Buddha, when the historical teacher who we call the Buddha, and Buddha just means the one who woke up. It's a very secular word, really. For the ACT folks around here, it could be the one who was defused, the one who could see his thoughts as thoughts, his emotions as emotions, and the images of the mind as images of the mind. Get a little free from that. Well, this definition, when it was given by the Buddha, he said, this is something I've heard. This is not something I made up, something I've heard. And you see intimations of this definition all over the world, and it's a two-part definition: a basic kindness with a deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and of other living things, coupled with a wish and effort to relieve that suffering, to alleviate and prevent that suffering. As the Dalai Lama says, it is not enough to feel compassionate, you must act. We do things, we take action when we're compassionate. Now, importantly, I'm going to grab this guy here. Well. So this is an experiential exercise in your compassion for the speaker. So we're going to just get this started here. Close this. Pardon me. Okay. It's also an exercise in slowing down a little bit. Now, importantly, compassion, as we understand it, is not an emotion, it's not a thought, it's not an idea, it's a deep motivation, and it's an embodied aspect of human intelligence. And the way I want to look at this together is that this is a multifaceted process that organizes the mind and that has evolved from the human caregiver mentality. The very uniquely human adult and child throughout the lifespan caregiving and parenting bonds that really make us who we are. And by the way, I'm sure we also can find some way to make the slides available online. I can put them up on my website, which is mindfulcompassion.com, and I'll reference that at the end. So if you're not keeping up, don't worry. Well, we live in the information age. We'll just send this right out, right? So compassion involves a series of interacting processes. And this is very important for our work with OCD and anxiety. A series of interacting processes. These processes can be trained. The training can involve deliberate practice, and it can involve behavioral principles where you can shape up this complex experience from the ground up and target specific treatment aims. When we talk about compassion in this way, we talk about two psychologies of compassion. It's a very British thing. This is from the UK compassion-focused therapy. I didn't know you could use psychology, plural, but apparently you can. Psychologies. One, the first psychology, is approaching and understanding and engaging with suffering. We call this the psychology of engagement. The second is working to alleviate and prevent suffering and its causes, and we refer to this as the psychology of alleviation and prevention. This is really cool for a few reasons. If you look at this, this involves acceptance and mindfulness processes, and this is commitment and behavior processes. So if you're an ACT-friendly person, this is right up your street. Also, if you're a DBT person, we're talking about mindfulness and process level work. And we're also talking about skills level work. And we're going to look at this really closely in ways that relate to specific techniques that you can use for the treatment of OCD. Now, there's 3 words we use in our imagery practices and when we are working in the psychotherapy process with our clients. These 3 words which kind of sum up the quality that we have when we're embodying compassion. And these 3 words are wisdom, strength, and commitment. And if you think about what it would be like, just what it would be like if you were in your compassionate mind, if your mind was organized by this sensitivity to suffering. Like let's say, heaven forbid, there's a burning building, and there's someone you love who's in the building, and the firemen are doing everything, firemen and women, firefighters are doing everything they can to help save all the people in that building. But this one person, maybe it's your niece, maybe it's your nephew, or even your child, they're in the building. You know they're in that building. The firefighters don't believe you. They think you're panicking. They want to hold you back. You know you can run in there and save this loved one. You know right where they are. Who is going to be stopped in that situation? Is there anyone here who would be stopped? No. So when we talk about compassion, we're not talking about just being nice or being soft or being loving. And I take a decidedly pro-loving, nice, and soft stance. That's not a problem. But we're talking about having courage, having wisdom, strength, and commitment. And those aren't just abstract qualities. They're essential human qualities that emerge from the peculiarities of our human evolution. Because all of our suffering exists in an evolutionary context. It exists in the context of our social histories, and our suffering exists in the context of our present moment. In the words of Alan Watts, a very wonderful philosopher, Western philosopher of global wisdom traditions from the early 70s, we come out of the world, not into it. We're an emergent species in the flow of life on Earth, and our brains and the motives and every part of us has emerged from this extending experience of life on the planet. And our response patterns and our emotions are designed by evolution to function in certain ways. We're designed for wanting, for craving, for needing, and seeking permanence. We feel fear, we aggress, we love, and we grieve, and we know our destiny. You know, on the ACT listserv a few years ago, we were discussing the origins of humanity, and I said something that was misinterpreted. I said that, and lots of you are familiar with these things, that every molecule, every atom, every component of who you are actually likely had its origins in the explosion of stars billions of years ago. We're made of the stuff of the universe. And the most complicated and wondrous observable phenomenon so far as we know, is actually you and your wonderful brain. Your brain has more possible discrete neuronal connections than there are stars observable in the sky or grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. Those are facts. And someone wrote, "You are such a nice poet. You write this beautiful poetry." And I thought, well, I'll take the compliment, but that's not the point. The point is who we are is who we are, not who I am. We exist in a flow of life and in a social, verbal community. I was so excited last night listening to Hillary Clinton's speech. And it's kind of hard to say politics aside after saying that, but politics aside, I was excited because there was a major presidential candidate who was emphasizing we, emphasizing us. And that's important, as you'll see, and as some of you already know, not just because it's loving or it suits my values. It's important for the survival of the species and the emotional survival of every one of you as individuals that we understand our interconnectedness and we're moved by suffering and take action to do something about it. So just like an amoeba, just like this tiny single-celled organism that only gets to be called an organism really because it has a membrane. It's not just the primordial ooze anymore. It has a beginning and an ending. Any living thing, we move towards what might sustain us and benefit us, and we move away from the things that might harm us. It's kind of amazing if you think about it. Just that one little cell, as soon as it's organized that way, if there's light or heat, it'll move away. And if there's food, it'll move towards it. And we're like that. That's how determined we are. Our lives are extremely short. If you're lucky, you get 25,000 to 35,000 days. We decay, our lives decay and end. Everyone we love, everyone we know is going to die and will be sick and neurotic and grow old in the meantime. This is the cheerful part of the talk. That's what I like to call that. So what does this tell us? Oh, also, the social circumstances of our lives. They're not ours. We didn't have control over them. I didn't choose my ticket in the genetic lottery, nor did I choose the school I grew up in. I didn't choose whether I was bullied by family or by friends. I didn't choose the social circumstances that shaped my behavioral repertoires in really powerful ways, right? We often say in compassion-focused therapy with our clients that, if I were kidnapped and I was raised in a violent drug gang somewhere, I probably wouldn't be a compassion psychologist. My dad was a violent, drug gang guy. I would go into the family business. 85% of young men in those environments go into the family business. They don't go into the family business because they're bad. That's just what happens. It's kind of an amazing thing to think about. It's amazing. So much in life that causes our suffering is not of our choosing and is not our fault. And this is the key message when we begin bringing a compassion focus to our therapy, is to recognize we can de-shame, de-pathologize, and emphasize that it's not our fault. And importantly, compassion-focused therapy isn't called compassion therapy. It's called compassion-focused therapy, and that was by design. because it's designed by Paul Gilbert and enhanced by our colleagues to be an approach to therapy that doesn't have to be a new way of doing therapy, because it's gotten tiresome, all the different therapies after a point. You go to school, you get an MSW or a PhD or an MD, you learn how to do a therapy, you learn CBT, and then there's MBCT, DBT, ACT, CFT, KGB, CIA, FBI. It's amazing. Do you want to do a workshop? I just finished graduate school, man. What are you talking to me about? So, you can learn a lot about CFT and do workshops and have supervision and become a CFT therapist. There are a few of the folks in the world who do that. But I want you to be able to take out of this 90 minutes a way to do compassion-focused therapy. Your therapists, those of you who are, your researchers, those of you who are, you're engaging in self-therapy or self-family therapy. And this is all about bringing a compassion focus to whatever therapy you do. And that begins with a reality check that to me, I'll speak for myself. I'm being arrogant when I blame myself, right? Because I imagine I have control over all the circumstances that have shaped my behavior. And I can choose what to do when my habits dictate most of what I do. I'm also being arrogant when I don't take responsibility for my actions. The first step I would suggest to you in accepting responsibility for the course of your actions, experiencing real remorse of conscience, and having transformational self-compassion is recognizing the wisdom of blamelessness. You didn't ask for any of this, but you've got it. You're here, we're here, so what do we do about it? Well, we find the part of the answer in what to do about it in our evolutionary history. Many of the problems that people seek therapy for, and a lot of what goes on in obsessive-compulsive disorder, have to do with behavioral repertoires and biological systems that are like hundreds of millions of years old. A lot of what troubles us is deeply rooted in old brain systems. This is MacLean's diagram of the triune brain, and as it turns out, it's not a perfect diagram, and it goes back and forth every few years of being bunked and debunked, and it's not perfect, but it's important because we can recognize that we have a reptilian brain and a series of behavioral repertoires that are very old that involve fight, flight, freeze, immediate threat detection, always on, better safe than sorry, 24/7 threat detection, sexual reproduction, and things like that. We have behavioral repertoires and brain structures that we share with older mammal species. We call that the paleomammalian or old mammalian brain. Tribalism, in-group, out-group behaviors, and even some attachment bonds and some caring. And then we have our human brain with its peculiar capacity to abstract, to think, and to represent the whole outside world inside the mind, and then to learn from the stuff that goes on inside the mind, which means we respond to imaginary stuff as if it were real, which is really good because we can, learn how to use fire and share tools and things like that. We don't have to keep picking up the bright, shiny end of the burning stick and burn our hands and not learn how to do that. We can learn from imaginary contingencies. But as you see and as you know, it gets us into terrible trouble because whatever the mind dreams up, we're sort of subject to. It influences our state. It influences our behavior. So what we find and we say in compassion-focused therapy is that we need compassion for a very tricky brain, a brain that has old brain emotions, motives, such as relationship seeking, creating, all those things, threat-based things. And we also have these new brain capacities like imagination, planning, ruminating, integrating, and they get into tricky loops, and that can cause us trouble. So our brain is designed in a better safe than sorry sort of way. And this bit is like really, really important for OCD and for anxiety in general. And I wasn't joking about having anxiety disorder problems. I have slightly different initials. I have PTSD and GAD. I hate the initials, man. And I really hate disorder at the end of it. But we'll live with it for now. We'll come up with better ways to say this. I'll come back in 10 years and will have a more humane way of describing what we go through. But for now, this bit is really important for living with anxiety disorders. You've probably heard the phrase, the evolutionary psychology phrase, that you can skip lunch many times, but you can only be lunch once. Okay? So if we look at a bunch of birds out on the lawn pecking around, if there's any loud noise, they're going to fly away. Maybe 1 in 1,000 times that's a real threat, but for the birds, that's kind of not the point. The point is, better safe than sorry, right? So here we are. We're having a nice chat. And I have a lot of behavioral freedom. I have these 2 microphones that I mentioned earlier. I can walk over here if I wish. I can talk over here. I can walk back over here. I can tell a joke. I could sing a song. It would be peculiar. I could even leave. I could walk away. It would be bad to do that. It would be bad for my reputation. And it would be an abrogation of my responsibility to your aims. And Jeff wouldn't like it. So I won't do those things, but I could. And as you have enormous behavioral flexibility, right? You could be on your phone, on Facebook, tweeting, live tweeting, or shopping online, any number of things. Now, if someone came in here, God forbid, and put a gun to my head, where would my attention be? It would be on the gun, like a lot. And what behavioral repertoires and options would I have available to myself at that time? Very few. It would be all about surviving. So I want you to remember this. When we're under the control of threat-based processing, our attentional repertoires and our behavior narrows. Just like that circle. That's my very fancy animation for today. Just, and I do that a lot with my clients. We talk about like, okay, we're up here, we're wide, we're expansive, we're engaging with a valued life, and then threat conditions, and it narrows. So in that condition, I'm all about this gun. Now the thing is, it doesn't even have to be a real gun. It could be the idea of a gun. Or if I have social anxiety, it could be the idea of a party. Or the idea of, being up here. I have a client who's a firefighter. I couldn't fight a fire. I'd be terrified. He heard I was going to give a talk. He went, whoa. Oh my God, just the thought of it was frightening to him. So just the thought of things affects us, right? This is what the comedian Mark Maron calls thinky pain. I like that a lot. And it's what we call in acceptance and commitment therapy work, fusion. So let's talk a little bit more about evolution for a moment. What would you say is our chief advantage, our chief evolutionary advantage? Just throw out a couple things. Reasoning. That's a good one, reasoning. Somebody was going to say Pokemon Go. I was going to run right out of the room. But reasoning, and reasoning arguably arrives to us through communication. Not everyone agrees on this, but that thinking and cognition is an internalized way of languaging. It seems that human beings, at a certain point in our evolution, needed to be able to cooperate. We needed to be able to look each other in the eye, share tasks, carry food together, use tools together. And in order to cooperate over iterations and generations, we began to have certain traits. So if I were a gorilla, this would be a very strange plenary. But besides that, if I were a gorilla and I looked over there and I pointed over there and I held my finger up, where would you look? Someone said the finger. You'd actually look at the finger. Gorillas don't follow like that. We're the primate that does that. We have whites of our eyes, and we have the ability to imagine what's going on in the mind of another person. We are the cooperative species. It turns out that about 2% of the species of insects in the world kind of work cooperatively, and they make up for over 60% of the biomass of insects in the world. So human beings developed this ability to communicate, to think, to talk, reasoning, to describe things, and to mentally represent contingencies in the outside world. This is very powerful. Unfortunately, it has a couple of side effects. One side effect is that the brain needs to have this enormous prefrontal cortex. We have a 1,450 cc brain, and the next closest relative is like a 450 cc brain. So I've gone to the trouble of losing all of my hair so you could just see this prefrontal cortex experience, right? And since we began walking upright to carry things and share things, for men, this gave us back problems, because our back isn't designed to function this way. And for women, you get a worse deal, which is often the case in human life, unfortunately. For women, the birth canal narrows. So this means that childbirth is highly dangerous and uncomfortable and risky for the child and the mother, which then means, you with me so far on this? Groovy, okay. We have a very low birth rate, and infant survival becomes extremely important. It also means that we're not born carried fully developed. We're born sort of half-cooked, if you will. We're fragile, we don't have any claws, we can't protect ourselves. We're just these helpless little cute creatures. I remember in maybe 1980, it's time to learn about reproductive health, I guess, and so all of the girls go to talk about the topics that girls talk about at that point, and they have to do something with these crazy 12-year-old New Jersey boys, So they showed us a movie of a horse being born. Have you ever seen a horse being born? So the first response you can imagine, the horse comes out and it's like blood and all this. So everybody's, ew, after they get over their gross out factor. You then watch the mother horse just kind of gets rid of the afterbirth, and this horse just kind of wobbles up and it's off doing horse things. Like horse stuff happens. Just like that. If you're a psychotherapist, you didn't just emerge from the womb and start doing psychotherapist stuff. Like, let's run an ANOVA, quick. We've got to get some SPSS right here, right now, or do therapy. No, we need a long, extended period of being looked after and being cared for. And I used to say this joke, which was that the length of human adolescence was about 50 years. And some of you know where I'm going with this. And then I read a study from a major university saying we really need to think about human adolescence and how at this point it is functionally until about 50. Which I dig, because I'm 48 and I got 2 more years to be an adolescent, which is kind of convenient. The main point of this, though, is that we need to be looked after, and that we've emerged through evolution to feel centered and protected, and to have our threat response down-regulated in the presence of warmth and loving kindness. And this is particularly important because of the way our human brain processes and holds on to threat. So let's imagine for a moment that I'm a zebra. And I'm at the zebra watering hole. And I have a zebra brain, just like any zebra would. And there's a lion, and he comes after me. And almost gets me. Maybe he's like distractible lion, and he sees a squirrel, and he runs off in the other direction, but he doesn't quite get me. I run away. Within 10 minutes, my zebra threat detection system has completely slowed down and completely calmed down. That's what happens with zebras. If I, as a zebra, had a human brain, I would be up in the middle of the night, wondering, oh my God, is there going to be a zebra at the watering hole tomorrow? What if there's 2 zebras? I'm a very bad zebra, actually. I screwed that up today. How am I going to put my kids through zebra college? This is what we do. And one of the reasons we do it is that we can't think about something without thinking about it, right? Which means you can't not think about something without thinking about it. It's baked in. So if I'm trying to not think of that purple gorilla for 5 minutes in a lab exercise, and I have to make a tick mark every time I think of the purple gorilla, I'm going to have a lot of tick marks. Don't think about a purple gorilla. It just keeps going through our mind. If I'm told, yeah, for the next 5 minutes, think about anything you want. If it happens to be a purple gorilla, that's okay. Go. Not so many tick marks. Also, and this is to me the heart of a lot of working with OCD. It's the heart of what shows up when you look at it from a cognitive and behavioral model, right? And a lot of you are very familiar with this. The image of this anxiety-provoking thought enters my mind, you know? Like, what if I'm a horrible person? What if I want to molest a child, for example? And so distressing, the thought, it activates us. Because we respond to imaginal things as though they're literal, our threat response is kicked up, right? And then we push that thought away. We do what any reasonable organism would do, avoid the dangerous thing. If my clients say, like, is avoidance bad? No. Avoid the bus when it's coming at you, you know, avoid disease, avoid running out of food. There's a lot of good avoidance things. Unfortunately, avoidance doesn't work in our minds. So we push away the anxiety-provoking experience. We feel that moment of relief, consciously or unconsciously. That's a reward, and you're familiar with this, and we get stuck in this loop. So humans with human brains get stuck in loops of threat detection and threat processing. And by the way, everything we've talked about so far would be a part of compassion-focused therapy in working with a client, in part of the psychoeducation. I want my clients to learn all of this and internalize it. And a brain and a mind that doesn't understand itself is far more dangerous than a mind or a brain that understands itself. So what we're looking at here is a model created by Paul Gilbert based on affective neuroscience and the three major motivational and emotional systems that human beings experience. We call it the three-circle model, even though they're three ellipses, because we're cool like that. We just get away with that kind of thing. But it's the three-circle model of motivation and emotion. A lot of the things I'm saying to you today, including the jokes, come from CFT as writ and can be attributed to Paul Gilbert and the community. This in particular is unique, and it really helps illustrate what's going on with anxiety disorders and with the way compassion can help. So we have these three major emotional systems. Let's look at them, and I want you to think about them. I want you to think about them together. So this one at the bottom, this represents our threat-focused processing, seeking protection, safety seeking, anger, anxiety, and importantly, disgust. This is that always on, better safe than sorry, attention narrowing, behavioral repertoire narrowing system. And the major neurotransmitter involved in this, there's several, but arguably serotonin, which is one of the reasons why serotonin reuptake inhibitors work so well for the treatment of anxiety as well as depression. So this other system up here, this blue circle, this is our drive, excitement, and vitality circle. I sometimes think of this as the Charlie Sheen circle because it's all about winning. It's about experiencing pleasure, seeking resources, wanting, pursuing, achieving, and consuming. And the major neurotransmitter you'll see in this is dopamine. Clinically, you're going to experience people with problems with this system when they're manic or expansive or dealing with addictive problems. And then this circle's way big, it's way inflated. Or when people are chronically depressed and their ability to derive pleasure from things isn't very present, and this shrinks down. So if you think about it, let's do a little experiment together. of how this system works and how our minds can influence the system, okay? So here's something Jeff hasn't told everyone yet, and I hope he doesn't mind if I spill the beans. There's a huge grant from, I don't know, who has huge grants anymore? Okay. The Bloomberg Foundation for the Furtherance of Human Knowledge and Well-Being. And because of this huge grant, there's a $1 billion fund of money that what we're going to do is you all get a share of this. You get to go home with it and live your life for a year, and we'll just see what you did with it. Just enjoy it. So everybody here is going to get about, I don't know, like $20 million. So enjoy that. When you go back to your room, when you go to sleep tonight, just, remember that you have that $20 million. So the bad news is that this is not true. This is complete falsehood. There is no $20 million that you're going home with. You knew that already. Did any of you feel some kind of excitement at just the idea of that money? I could see some faces going, hey, yeah, wow, money, $20 million. I could pay half my student loans off with that kind of money. And could you imagine what would be going on in the middle of the night? You might be waking up, it's hard to sleep, woo, having a great time. See, interestingly, this also narrows our attention and narrows our behavior and gets us together and ready for action. So these two have a little bit of a thing in common, really. This is the emotion system we're going to be targeting for the rest of our talk. This is the safeness and kindness system. This is the secure attachment system, what Bowlby and Ainsworth and attachment theorists have described as a secure base for operation in the world. The oxytocin vasopressin system is involved, and also the polyvagal complex, this wonderful extension of the 10th cranial nerve through the body to allow us to engage in a rest and digest and tend and befriend experience. When we are feeling stable, soothed, loving, and loved, in fact, this threat experience is downregulated. We're able to remain in the presence of difficult experiences and threats and aversion when we feel socially safe, loved, and cared for. Now, from the research in secure attachment, we know that there are certain attributes and skills that arise when you train the mind in warm, affiliative, compassionate experiences. And we're going to look at them a little bit more closely, but for now, this inner ring represents the psychology of engagement from earlier. When we are compassionate or empathically attuned, we know that people will have greater care for personal well-being. We know that they will be sensitive in the present moment to the suffering they experience in the world around them. They'll be more mindful and more attuned. We know that they'll have sympathy and an immediate emotional resonance. If you're walking through the lobby and you see someone and they're just like this, you might not know what's going on, but you will be moved by that. You'll experience it. When you look at the eyes of your client, you ever have a client if you're a psychotherapist, or just a buddy if you're not a therapist, and they walk in the room and they're trying to have a facial expression that everything's okay, but you immediately know on an emotional level something needs help? That's sympathy. So we have care for well-being, present moment focused sensitivity, sympathy, and the ability to tolerate distress. You can't engage in good enough parenting or pro-social action or psychotherapy or even facing your own inner demons until and unless you cultivate an ability to tolerate that necessary distress that shows up just by being a person here on the planet. Also, the compassionate mind has empathy. It has a cognitive understanding, as described in theory of mind or flexible perspective taking, the ability to imagine what it would be like to see the world through the eyes of another, for me to see the world through your eyes and experience myself as you. These are all emergent properties when you cultivate the mind in compassion. I'm going to take a moment to describe two ways we train the mind in compassion-focused therapy. The first involves that funny capacity we have to respond to imaginary things as if they're real. So if I were to say to you right now to imagine your favorite food, like just for me it's lasagna and the gooey cheese and the whole situation, my body would be getting ready for lasagna. I would have like gastric juices and a rumbling kind of experience ready for this imaginary lasagna. It didn't have to be real, but my body was ready to respond to it. And if I were to say something like fingernails on a blackboard, yeah, there we go. At least some people go, ugh, get that embodied response. It's not just whether we believe it's true or not. And that's really important for OCD. Because if somebody has depression, they go to cognitive therapy and they are able to debunk and not believe the thought, sometimes that's really helpful, But the crushing thing about OCD is it's not about believing the thought. It's about a mental event that it just shows up in your experience again and again and again, and when it shows up, it evokes so much distress. So what we're going to do with compassion-focused therapy, the first way we train compassion, is we game that system. Just like the lasagna image, if I can create an image in my mind that stimulates this system, if I can imagine wisdom, strength, and courage, if I can envision myself in a deep state of imagery and meditation as being a compassionate, courageous being, my body responds through experiencing soothing and stabilization. My parasympathetic nervous system is engaged. The vagal complex is engaged. And I'm more stable and I'm ready to face my fears. Sometimes I'll imagine being in the presence of a supportive and caring and compassionate other. So I know that I'm socially safe. I know I'm not abandoned. And I can feel stabilized and engaged and ready to face my fears. We are practicing being the person we wish to be. That was the loudest plosive in my entire career. We are practicing being the person we wish to be. You don't have to worry if you are compassionate. You train up that compassionate aspect of you and it arrives. Also, we can train each of these attributes. We can cultivate, these are interacting processes which can be trained. And our capacity for compassion and flexible responding grows in tune. We also do that through cultivating these skills. We use imagery practices, reasoning practices, as my friend here mentioned, ways of thinking and changing your thoughts or your relationship to your thoughts. We practice behaviors that activate and stimulate our soothing system. We use sensory experiences that evoke an experience of loving kindness and compassion. We cultivate compassionate emotions, and we use our capacity to train a broad attentional spectrum. So you can work from the bottom up, evoking a compassionate mind and manifesting these attributes, or you can work from the top down, drawing on ACT, drawing on CBT, IPT. We won't draw on KGB this particular week. But we can draw on all of these therapeutic repertoires to cultivate our capacity for compassion. And before we conclude today, we're going to do a little bit of that work experientially. So this is the time in the talk where I deliberately hope for a miracle, because my compassionate motivation for us has grown. I actually really want you to take some of this home with you. You know, that would mean something to me. And we have so little time. This is a one-year course which became a 5-day workshop, which was reduced to a 3-day workshop, which can be done in 2 days, 1 day if that's all we have, and we have 90 minutes. So I am with my heroic colleagues here who share a mission, and we're going to get through a miraculous amount together through the power of our will and intention. And that is the most woo-woo thing I'll allow myself to say. So let's look at the research on compassion in a user-friendly way. And I might sound a little bit like I have pressured speech for just a couple of minutes, if I don't already, because I want us to touch on these really important science-y things in a very friendly way. We know that from the day we are born until the day that we die, compassion and affiliative emotions will have powerful effects on every aspect of who we are and how we develop as a person. Well, what does that mean? We know from the literature that practicing imagining compassion for others produces changes in our frontal cortex and our immune system. The levitating guy is taking it a little far in the picture, but it does. Practicing imagining compassion for others does affect our frontal cortex and immune system. We know that regularly practicing loving kindness meditation increases positive emotions, mindfulness, feelings of purpose in life, social support, or at least perceived social support, and decreases in illness symptoms. If we want to work with our response to stress, a 6-week compassion meditation intervention can improve immune function, neuroendocrine, and behavioral responses to stress. In terms of shame and self-criticism, where compassion really shines, compassion training reduces shame and self-criticism in chronic depressed patients and, although I don't have this study up, in anxiety and depressed mixed population patients. We know that brief loving kindness meditation can increase feelings of social connectedness and change our response to strangers. People with, I'll just read this, I suppose. Self-compassion has been an important mediator for reduction in negative emotions associated with personality disorders, and self-compassion is an intervention that's recommended as a target for therapeutic interventions. In a recent meta-analysis and literature review, Stefan Hoffman and his colleagues found that adding compassion-focused interventions to other interventions is a highly effective way to enhance the effectiveness of your therapy. Recently, and I loved this, in a sample of 207 undergraduate students, participants who were trained to engage in compassionate thinking or a cognitive reappraisal intervention which involved taking the perspective of a family member had significantly lower levels of negative emotions as compared to those in responsibility reattribution or more traditional cognitive reappraisal. CFT, as a package, so far has been validated as an effective in the treatment of personality disorders, eating disorders, heterogeneous mental health problems, people presenting to mental health teams, and it's not on the slide, but depression in people with psychosis. This is a study I just did with some colleagues in the UK. We did a 3-week self-administered compassion imagery pilot study with 38 undergraduate students, small sample, but 3 weeks self-administered practicing the compassionate self-meditation that we are going to do before we conclude. Significant improvement in self-compassion in a sample of people who had body image concerns. Significant improvement in their body appreciation. Significant reduction in body shaming and reductions in anxiety. And we're replicating this study. It's already been replicated in Portugal. We replicated it in a population of people looking at destigmatizing their experience of homelessness. So what we're talking about is a portable, brief compassionate imagery practice that can, on its own, have great benefit or can enhance the work that you do in other forms of therapy. So when I began by saying, hey, the data's not on our side yet in the compassion world because we don't have the RCTs, I remember a wiser, more eloquent, balder colleague of mine, an older, balder, better colleague named Steve Hayes, 15 years ago, talking about ACT and talking about how the data, the process data, was on their side. But the outcome data isn't there. And Steve Hayes has been the major person helping Paul Gilbert and I bring this to the States. Because this is where the process data, behaviorally, biologically, and now in terms of psychotherapy research is going. And why wouldn't it go there? This is what makes us most fundamentally human. So I want to make this case a little bit further. What are the qualities of this compassionate mind in action? This is where we're headed, by the way, in CFT in America. This is one of the first talks that we're really touching on this, and it's real important stuff. Some of you are familiar with the psychological flexibility model in acceptance and commitment therapy. In more than 40 studies with nearly 10,000 participants, that's as of 2008, psychological flexibility, the ability to contact the present moment, holding difficult experiences lightly, being the author of valued directions, moving with commitment towards those valued directions, and having a broad, expansive sense of self along the way. This experience has accounted for 16 to 33% of most psychological outcomes in a huge number of studies, far more studies now, 8 years later. And there's evidence, even way back when, that the effects of negative thoughts, difficult feelings, maladaptive coping, response styles, cognitive reappraisal, perceived controllability are all partially or fully mediated by psychological flexibility. Okay, what is psychological flexibility? Is it something that they dreamt up in Reno? Is it just some neat processes that happen to hang together in behavioral research? I don't think so. It is the qualities that emerge when you have secure attachment dynamics and you access a stable, mindful, compassionate frame. When you experience yourself as a component of a greater we, recognizing impermanence and interconnectedness, and you have a place to stand, and you know you have playfulness and room to explore. That's what we need to facilitate exposure and response prevention. That's what we need to gently walk beside our clients and walk beside ourselves as we face some of the most terrifying experiences we can face. That's what we need. And as it turns out, when you look at the qualities of compassion that we looked at earlier, we can view psychological flexibility as a compassionate flexibility, a quality of engaged experience where you're contacting the present moment not just as a conscious being, but as an emotionally conscious being, sensitive to the present moment, but also sensitive to the emotional experience and suffering of yourself and others. Fully motivated, not just for values, which are great, and I love them, but motivated at your core, at your evolutionary core, to alleviate and prevent the suffering you encounter in yourself and others. Persistently adapting to competing and changing demands within and without, and either persisting in a committed way to meet those demands, or letting it go when you need to. Being able to flexibly take perspective with empathy and with sympathy, and maintaining this open and non-condemning perspective on yourselves and the human condition, and disentangling yourself from the excessive influence of your evaluative and judgmental thoughts. What this creates is an experience of the compassionate mind where all of these qualities can be trained. And they can be trained individually, interacting with one another, rising together. And they can also be trained in the context of the psychotherapy relationship, where we create a de-shaming, destigmatizing, human-to-human relationship with the wisdom of blamelessness. And in that genuine affiliative bond, in that genuine adult attachment bond that is created, we experience our compassionate mind interacting and creating, co-creating the compassionate mind of another. This flow of compassion can move from self to other. We can experience it from other to self, and we can experience it and train it as a self-compassionate flow. Compassion moving from self to self. So we train compassion in the therapy relationship. The therapist uses herself as a social reinforcer. We help clients to identify the way the mind is organized by anxiety, depression, anger. We do role plays. We use chair work so people can bring their compassionate self into contact with their anxious or angry self. And we use specific therapy techniques to help people find their way to this compassionate flexibility. I like to think of this compassionate flexibility as courage. I like to think of myself as being in the courage business, quite frankly. Courage means the mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. I spent a lot of time talking about anxiety in the first half of my career. I want to spend the second half of my career talking about courage, about who we are in the presence of our fear. Knowing how we can cultivate the ability to do something that you know is difficult or dangerous. And one of the earliest writers on wisdom or on anything, Lao Tzu, years and years, thousands of years ago, wrote that because of great love, one is courageous. Being deeply loved gives you strength. Loving someone gives you courage. And that could be like a meme or a Hallmark card or a platitude, but it's not. Because when we experience being in the presence of a loving, supportive other in an attachment dyad, we feel stronger. And when we love someone deeply, we feel courage. We are willing to run into that burning building. C.S. Lewis said that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point. And in a beautiful, beautiful passage, Nelson Mandela taught me a lot about how to conduct exposure and response prevention, even though I certainly never met him. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. I have a fear of the next several slides. They're wordy, and I want you to have them when you download them. But we're going to go through them in a very playful, exploratory, and cursory fashion. Because I want to talk about how we do exposure in CFT. I want to talk about it directly. And if you are a researcher, this is a call to arms. It's a call to arms to better understand how we can accelerate and humanize the process of exposure in context. And I've had many clients I've worked with who refused. I'm just going to ask you to take this out. This is only my experience. It's anecdotal. I'm not asking you to buy it. It'll always be this way. But I've had clients who refused ERP until they cultivated the ability to stabilize themselves with a compassionate mind. And then, from that place, fully without avoidance strategy, engaging with the feared stimuli. It's very important. And it makes sense that it would, because as Lisa Coyne, beautiful talk about ACT and ERP earlier today, we've known for the last 8 years since the seminal literature review of Michelle Krask and her colleagues, that interestingly, our old model of doing ERP, which still works, by the way, quite well, not a problem. I did it thousands of hours of ERP this way, quite frankly. Engage in the exposure until the fear or distress sufficiently subsides, and then move on. Well, what we know is that this reduction of distress in SUDS, we know that therapeutic outcome is not reliably predicted by the level of fear reported at the end of exposure, and neither the degree to which the fear is reduced during the exposure. Now that's tricky. So if we think about this model of narrowing behavioral repertoires and narrowing attention, what we're trying to do is to create a context where new learning can take place. A context where we can have broadening behavioral repertoires and broadening attention in the presence of repertoire narrowing stimuli. That's sort of an ACT, CFT, integrative CBT kind of way of looking at this here and now. And we can actually facilitate what is described as inhibitory learning, like not keeping our focus on getting rid of old experience, but cultivating a new psychic muscle, a new capacity to respond. So our patients don't need to extinguish old associations, but develop new ways of operating in a whole new range of associations. So we're engaging in repertoire building, repertoire broadening in the presence of repertoire narrowing stimuli. And we know that fear tolerance rather than fear reduction is what we're going for. So compassion can be involved in cultivating that fear tolerance. So we're going to do together a really keystone imagery practice. So if we were doing like a 2 or 3 day workshop, after about a day of preparatory exercises, we would do this. Or if we were in group therapy, this would be week 3. Or if I were working with you in individual work, this could be week 5. So why not do it after 70 minutes, right? because we're safe with one another, right? We're courageous. Now, importantly, nothing here is compulsory, right? You can observe this exercise without engaging in it. You can do anything that you wish. And who am I to even tell you that? You know that already. But there's something about being a person up on a podium, kind of suggesting something that can sometimes exert a little influence. And I don't want to involve in that kind of psychic coercion or whatever it is, social coercion. So really, if you don't want to do this, don't do it. It's all right. But if you're curious, or even if you'd like to learn how to do this with your client, just take part in this together just as much as you can. We're going to begin with a practice that we do in CFT called the soothing rhythm breathing exercise, which is a slowing down of our breathing. It's based on Vipassana Shamatha meditation, which is both a mindfulness and a centering meditation. It's also based on what's called coherent breathing, where we slow the breath to engage the parasympathetic and center. We're then going to create an image of ourselves as a compassionate being, and we're going to see what that would be like. So before we do the practice, which will only be about 5 minutes, it's usually about 15 to 20-minute practice, but in this context, I like to keep it brief. I'd like you to imagine what your compassionate self might look like. You know, I used to think that Paul Gilbert, my mentor, used to say he liked a little James Bond in his compassionate self, you know. And then when I was younger, I used to like to think of Johnny Depp in my compassionate self. You know, now if it's like a Jeff Bridges that shows up, I'm like already ahead of the game. You know, I could like deal with that. So, you know, it could be you, it could be an idealized version of you, it could have elements of what you imagine as stabilizing and empowering. Part of this practice comes from Tibetan Buddhism and imagery practices, but interestingly, a lot of it actually comes from method acting. And in London, we have method acting workshops so that people can practice evoking these ideas. So what we say to people is like, this is your Meryl Streep moment, you know, this is your Bobby De Niro moment. You're just going to take a moment and just play with this. You don't have to worry if you really are this compassionate self. Just imagining how wonderful it would be. What would it be if for a moment you were? Just what it would be like to be that. So I'm going to step over here. So as Paul Gilbert likes to say, please find a comfortable place to sit, unless you'd prefer to be uncomfortable, and that's okay too. You can do that. And just bring attention to your feet on the ground. Let's just settle into the seat in the chair. Letting your eyes close. You're approaching 2/3 of the way through this conference. You're through the middle. And I honor the work that you do by being here. I really do. I honor all of our work on ourselves and our work with our clients. So we'll just soften and follow our breath together. Breathing in, knowing we're breathing in. Then breathing out and knowing that we're breathing out. As we breathe in, it's as if we're pouring attention into the body, filling the body with awareness. And as we exhale, just letting go. And with each out-breath, just extending the out-breath, slowing down, holding yourself in kindness. Resting in the breath. And with this slow, even breath, just holding our attention as much as we can, gently, here and now. The mind wanders, we gently bring it back here and now. Imagine yourself sitting in a safe, inviting, compassionate space. It could be a place besides the sea, feeling the sun on your face, or somewhere in the woods, the soft earth beneath your feet. This compassionate, safe space is yours. It exists for you, to give you a place to rest. And we're going to imagine ourselves becoming this compassionate self. And just as we may fill a glass of water with a cool, clear water from a pitcher, just imagining we're filling from the top of our head our entire physical presence with this compassionate being. Feeling this compassionate presence rising from our feet, up through our legs, through the torso, up to the top of the head. And feeling what it feels like to be this compassionate self, allowing our mouths to have a smile, exhaling, releasing tension in the face. And if our eyes were open, we would be looking through the eyes of our compassionate self. And we would see the clothing and the presence of this compassionate self. And we'll remember the qualities together that we have as we breathe in and breathe out. We know that the compassionate self is wise. It sees the big picture. It understands that so much in life that causes your suffering is not of your choosing and not your fault. Not your fault. The compassionate self is strong and resilient, can tolerate fear, can tolerate great distress on your behalf. And your compassionate self is completely committed to be caring, to looking after you, to holding you up when you need it. There's nothing in this world that matters as much to this compassionate self as your well-being here and now. And following the words that I'll repeat, or using words that speak more personally to you in your mind, in the still, silent voice in your mind, wishing yourself kindness and strength and compassion. May I be filled with loving kindness and compassion. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness and compassion. May the parts of me that resist compassion, may they come to know peace. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness and compassion. May I be happy. May I know joy. May I extend that joy to those around me. And with each out-breath, just letting go of the image and just coming back to this quiet, calm space. Resting in your breath, present, aware, confident. And my wish is that you will become more available to your compassionate self as it becomes more available to you. And that we can extend this mindfulness and compassion wherever we encounter suffering, cultivating flexibility and joy every moment we can. So whatever merit we've entered into together here, whatever good has come from our discussion, may some of that move forward in our lives to alleviate the suffering of others, of all beings. So when you're ready, letting out a long exhalation, just a long, just letting all that out. Woo! All right. Okay. Opening your eyes if they're closed, like doing what my dog Barney does, and stretch, being here together. We have just a couple of minutes, a few minutes. I'm going to take a moment to practice exposure to my fear of self and promotion, and mention that I have two books which I think would really speak to those of you who want to learn more about this, okay? One is a technical book called The ACT Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Compassion, ACT Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Compassion, which I wrote with my wonderful partner, Dr. Laura Silberstein. And another, which is a clinical, like a self-help book and a personal guide. It's called The Compassionate Mind Guide to Overcoming Anxiety. And we have those books here at the bookstore. You can get them on Amazon. Mindfulcompassion.com, which is my website, has a whole lot of material if you'd like to learn more about this or see full video workshops, or all these meditations are available.